guys in part for giving me for leaving the perfect position after spending time in the EIME program and maybe one day. The skills I learned in EIME have applied in the director assessment role that I was in, pretty clearly applied there, but have also extended into my role at the Hewlett Foundation as well. And I want to talk about that today, and hopefully there'll be some value there. So I'm really, it's so great to be back at BYU. I work at a place that is probably opposite of BYU in terms of, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. There's a different climate there, there's a different feel there. People have lost their faith there. We talk about that a lot. There are a lot of good people, though, and I guess that's the thing I've realized, is there are good people everywhere. Really good people. And but there's a huge concentration of them here. Wow. And it's been great to be back. I spent the day today. I'll talk a little bit about what I've been doing earlier today because it's relevant. And I think Dr. Silvik said I left an indelible imprint on the program. I think he's talking about the curtains downstairs in the EIME office space. My daughter and I built those back when there was somebody else here who wouldn't stop talking to me. Actually, it was me. I wouldn't stop talking to other people. And so the curtains were put up as a requirement.
I'm glad you clarified the
right, Holt? Yes. Holt was one who was grateful I had my curtains. All right.
That didn't do much good.
All right. So I want to talk today about the role that evaluation, measurement, monitoring play in making grants and being in the world of funding organizations. If you're a researcher, you're going to be always looking for grants. If you're working in an organization that's a nonprofit, you'll always be looking for grants. You'll be wondering about how some of this happens, how some of it works, and how people like me make decisions about funding. You may be even interested in, I'm okay if you become interested in the world of philanthropy as well. It's an amazing world to be in. And the skills that you're learning in these programs, both IP&T and EIME, can actually transfer really well to that field also. So you're kind of learning about a new field today, and you're going to learn about the work that I'm doing, which really has its home and its birth here at BYU and here in the state of Utah. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So, right, most of my time is spent saying no. Right, Delana?
Right.
Raise your hand if I've said no to you when you've asked for money. I am not going to tell the Delana story because she's here, she can tell her own story. But I want to tell some other stories of people that I've had to say no to. So one of the first people so I came to Hewlett, the Hewlett Foundation. I should give you a quick background. The Hewlett Foundation is the 6th largest private foundation in the country. It has an endowment of just about $9.2 billion. We give away 5% of that every year. So $400 to $500 million a year in grants, straight grants. We never repay it. No strings attached kind of grants. And it was started by William Hewlett, who was the founder of HP. Hewlett is 50 years old this year. It's been around for a very long time. But only recently, since 2001, when Bill Hewlett died, he left all of his money, his estate to the foundation. And so then it became a major player, especially in the education sphere and other arenas like climate change and global development, those sorts of things. Bill Hewlett, his most famous saying is never stifle a generous impulse. He was a man of great modesty. You will never find a building named after Hewlett. The fact that the company is named after him was something that bothered him his entire life. And the fact that his name went first was determined based on a coin flip. David Packard would have loved to have his name first. He was the outgoing, he was a politician later. But that's kind of how it functions. So just give you a sense of the place that I'm coming from and the place that Hewlett is and where I am. I'm a program officer there. There are about 20 to 25 of us program officers. Our job is to give away the money. The rest of the foundation is sort of built around the work that the 25 program officers do, just to make decisions about which organizations are going to get funded and which are not. And there are a few existential crises of being a program officer. First and foremost is we don't get to do any work. We don't do any work. Like all the amazing work that Hewlett is supporting, credited with happening, it's not us. It's people like Delana who I had to say no to.
He said yes first, just to clarify.
I was a
That
really
initial thought.
inexperienced, immature program officer at the time. I never say yes first anymore. So I can always come back and say yes later. But that's one existential crisis, is the people doing the work it's kind of like sitting up in a tree and watching all this work. But you get to see a lot of things, but you don't get to do it. And that can be hard. So if you like front lines, sort of in the trenches, doing work, interacting with people that you're actually trying to help and improve their lives, philanthropy is not the place to be. In fact, people leave it because they just can't stand not being there. I actually love it, so it's just, some people love it. When I first got there 2 years ago, one of the first people to knock on my door was somebody we had recently funded and had decided to stop funding. And his name was Shai Reshef. Has anybody heard of Shai Reshef? Shai started an organization called University of the People. And has anybody heard of University of the People? Okay, so it shows up in like Fortune magazine. He's basically built a university that is based on the premise that faculty will donate like a little bit of time to teach one course online, and put together a business degree that students anywhere in the world, people anywhere in the world can take. And he's focused his energy on like refugee situations right now, which is where he was getting a lot of attention. And Shai and I went to lunch at this nice place on Sand Hill Road where all the venture capitalists are, and sat down, and Shai proceeded to tell me why his organization was so important, and also a little bit about why he was so amazing. That doesn't always go over so well, but he was doing really amazing things. And of all the people that I've met with and said no to, Shai's the one who constantly emails me all the amazing things that are happening with University of the People. So anytime there's a news clip, anytime there's anything about what they're doing, I get it. And that's tough sometimes, because I look and say, wow, maybe I missed the boat on this, maybe not. I'll talk about how I made this decision later, but I'm just telling you the story of my experience with Shai. Shai is amazing. His TED Talk is phenomenal. You should watch it. His University of the People is a really great idea, and it's helping lots and lots and lots of people. It just didn't fit the kind of thing that we were trying to fund and do at the time. We helped them get accreditation. That's what we helped them do. But then we moved off of that. This one was not my decision, but Saul Kahn came to Hewlett, I don't remember what year it was, about a month or two before the launch of Khan Academy, maybe 6 months before the launch of Khan Academy. I'm not going to ask you if you've heard of Khan Academy, because who hasn't heard of Khan Academy? Okay, great. So the person in my seat before me, his name was Vic. He met with Saul and had a lot of conversations, and even invited a proposal. He told Saul yes. So Delaney, it's not just me. He told Saul yes, and then something happened where there was a disagreement, and Saul didn't want to meet the one little requirement that Vic had put in there, and Vic wanted to hold the line. So he held the line, not having any idea what was going to happen, like down the road, right? And said no, and pulled the proposal last minute, which rarely happens. This is actually a rare situation. I don't think we sit back and say we regret that. In fact, I would say maybe he made the right decision, because Saul didn't need our money. Like he made it without it, and that's actually better for us. And some foundations really want their names attached to things, and ours doesn't, so that worked out. But it's an example of saying no to someone. And then this one is an interesting one. Sometimes it's really easy to say no based on like common sense, like no, it doesn't fit. But there's a personal relationship. This is Chad Brassel. Chad was my graduate advisor at University of Nebraska. He's the reason that I came to BYU, back to BYU. And he's the reason I know how to change brakes on my car. And we had our kids at the exact same day in the same hospital. I know him really well. He's a great friend, someone I admire greatly. I know more than I've ever known about the Catholic faith because of Chad. And he knows a lot more than he wants to know about the Mormon faith because of Chad, or because of me. Chad called me up, within 2 or 3 weeks of me getting to Hewlett, and said, hey, we've got this extension center where we do biology out in the wilds of Nebraska, and wondering if that might be a good fit for Hewlett. Like to support the building of our building out there. And I said, no, it's not. Like we don't do anything like that. It's not anywhere in our realm, in our strategy, our goals that we're trying to accomplish. It was really easy, obvious to say no, but really hard actually to say no to somebody that I trusted so much and whose programs I was involved in and supported. Then some of them are just kind of heart-wrenching. Like this year, I've had to say no to the Holocaust Museum and to the Smithsonian not because what they're doing isn't a great idea, and what they want to do actually is in line with what we're doing, in a sense, but it would take us too far afield. And there's kind of some nuance here. And I'll get into a little bit about it later, just to give you some examples of the kinds of situations that I find myself in, the kinds of organizations that want money. I could add to this the Library of Congress. I got a handwritten letter from the Librarian of Congress. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to respond to that, right? I did. The answer was no. And that's how you respond. Organizations all over the world. Amazing ones. I will tell Delana Tom's story. Delana runs the Oakland High School of Utah, now Mountain Heights Academy, and is perfectly aligned. And is still in the sphere of an organization that we might be able to fund sometime. So don't get disheartened. But I'll talk about how we make those decisions. All right. So there is a man, a friend of mine, another mentor of mine, named Paul Brest. Paul was the president of the Hewlett Foundation before I got there, and before that was the dean of the Stanford School of Law, and still is at Stanford, still working. I don't know, these professors that work, just keep working. He loves it though. And Paul and I chat a lot, and he's a good friend of mine. When he was at Hewlett, he started something in the field of philanthropy that really isn't common. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around why this isn't common, but it's actually not common in philanthropy to have a strategy. To have some sort of this is what we fund and why we fund it and what we're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. A lot of foundations and organizations fund systems. Like they'll fund libraries, they'll fund existing things that maybe have their own strategies, but they don't have a particular goal they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to support institutions and things like that. Paul was not of that mind. Paul said, we need a strategy and we need to focus on outcomes. And it has become known as outcomes-focused philanthropy. That's the term. It's sort of on a, people are starting to push back against it because it's hard to do and it has its own issues. But Paul was fond of saying, set your strategy and your strategy will set you free. That's what he would say to the program officers. Because it's hard to say no if you don't know for sure if that organization or that idea fits. And as the examples I showed you, there are hundreds more. They're all amazing ideas. They're all hugely impactful, hugely important in their own right. And they're generally somebody who's also an amazing person, right? Recognized as a world expert in something or attached to an institution that's important or something like that. And so there is a challenge of the shiny object syndrome. When you have X number of dollars, you have to give it away. Like we have to give it away, or there's like a tax penalty. We don't have a choice. We have to give it away. And there's all these great things going on, and you can get distracted by them. So Paul was kind of saying, set your strategy, and your strategy will set you free. Meaning you can more easily say no and more easily say yes, and have confidence that what you're doing, you will know what kind of impact it will have. That's sort of the idea of Paul. And he started this, and he started building up this idea of outcomes-focused philanthropy and outcomes-focused grant-making. And he hired a woman named Faye Torsky, also one of my favorite people. Faye, I won't tell you her story, but Faye runs what became known and is now known as the Effective Philanthropy Group. It's a group of 3 or 4 people inside the Hewlett Foundation who help. They do a lot of things, but one thing they do is they help us set our strategies. They help us be more effective at how we give our money. And we recognize, there's some foundations I don't think that recognize them, some really big ones that start with the letter G. I love my friends at the Gates Foundation, but philanthropy can do a lot of harm. Like throwing money at things, it's not neutral. It's positive or negative usually. And I would submit that most often it's negative, actually. Unfortunately. Maybe that's dim. I don't know. But people don't know how to give their money away really well. It's really hard to give away money really well in effective ways. And that's what I've learned. And that's what Paul was trying to say. And what Faye does is run the group that helps us remember that. It's actually really hard to do this well and to not screw things up and to not cause more problems and do more harm than good. And that's what she runs. They also help with our internal learning, and they also give grants to other foundations to improve their philanthropy. That's kind of the one really unique thing that I love about Hewlett, is that we try to better our own field, and that's the role we play. And some people push back on that, but I think it's a good thing. So the Effective Philanthropy Group has helped us figure out how to create a strategy. What's the approach we're going to take? And they also help us with all of our evaluations and all of our monitoring. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. So when thinking about like what your strategic approach is going to be, when I came into the Hewlett Foundation, I inherited a strategy. I came into the Open Educational Resources strategy. I sent that around, but I think the link was broken. Did anybody even get to take a glance at it? Did anybody actually read it? Wow. Thank you for reading it. That document I sent around, that was a year and a half worth of work, my first year and a half at Hewlett, to revise the strategy. There was an existing strategy before I inherited that. Sometimes we decide to do something new. So something out there in the world, there's a reason to start a whole new strategy. That's pretty rare. Usually what we're doing is we're refining or revising or improving upon our strategies or adjusting to what's going on in the world and responding to the own work that we've been doing and work that our grantees have been doing. But there are some criteria for how to evaluate a strategy. And I think these are particular to philanthropy, but maybe there's some commonality in other strategies that you might set at an organization or nonprofit. That may be good to know if you ever end up there. Things we look for. First and foremost, we want to know, who's this going to help? How's it going to help them? Do we have any evidence that the strategy we're trying to lay out here is going to benefit people? And with a strong lens on equity. Are we helping the people who need help the most? And what impact are we going to have? And what are the spillover effects going to be? Meaning we're going to try and do X, Y, and Z, but is that going to have positive or negative impacts elsewhere? For the portfolio that I'm looking at, one of the spillover effects is we're threatening, not intentionally, but threatening to destroy the publishing industry. There's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of families involved. That's challenging to think about. And also, does it support the broader goals that the Hewlett family cares about? The Hewlett family is not as involved in the foundation anymore, but they set the vision and strategy. From the founder's vision and strategy is important. And so, notice it's not number one. I think that's important. Like, these things are more important, but we still pay attention to them. And then, what's the potential for this strategy to succeed? If we're going to try to accomplish this goal, do we have the people available? Meaning, partners are there people to give money to? Like when you start a brand new strategy, there was a strategy that began 5-6 years ago called Quality Education in Developing Countries, responding to the issue that the UN the Millennial Goals, I think they were called. The goal of that was to get kids in developing countries to school. Well, you know what? We succeeded. As a United Nations, we succeeded. Like the percentage of kids who go to school compared to prior to that is astoundingly different. Except the 7th grade literacy rate is still in the single digits. So we got them to school, but they didn't really do anything. And so this strategy was built up to address that issue. And it's actually a really interesting one. The goal of this strategy was to shed light on how students were doing. How might you understand how students are doing in a schooling setting? Dr. Sutweeks? Anybody? How do we do that here?
You have to measure it.
You have to measure it. Yes. And there's not measurement happening in the developing world generally. Like leaders, school leaders, policymakers, they didn't know this. They didn't know, aside from just like the research studies that went in and showed the literacy rates were low, they did not know how things were going on a regular basis. And so Hewlett funded an organization in India to go out and do this thing called citizen-led assessment, where they hired people to actually go out to every single state in India, there's like 700 states in India, and meet students in their homes, because they usually weren't at school, and give them very brief assessments to get a sense of where students actually were, and then they would take those results and post them publicly, so that leaders in the country and in the provinces and in the states would actually know where their students were, to try and affect policy change and get focus on improving the quality of the education, not just the quantity of the education. So that's an example of a strategy, and it was largely successful. The goals of that strategy were successful, and we ended that strategy, like about a year ago. And there are ways to evaluate when to end a strategy as well, but that's an example. Is the context favorable for it? Is there demand for it? Is there an evidence base? These sorts of things around, like, is there any chance that if we do this, it'll actually have an impact? And philanthropy's unique role. Like, is this something we should be doing? We consider ourselves society's risk capital, meaning we're willing to lose that money. We have to give it out anyway. So we're willing to take greater risk than maybe a government might be willing to take, although our dollars are much smaller. People are allowed to do with our dollars more than they could with some government funding. And then do we have the resources to do this? Meaning, mostly, well, do we have enough budget for it against all the other things we're doing? What won't we do? Like, what's the opportunity cost? What strategies are we not going to do because we're doing this one? Are there other funders, governments, private, institutional, that are around to help with this, that are interested in it? And then, most importantly, probably, from my perspective, is internal capacity. I am a program of one. So any strategy that I set, I have to execute. I share an assistant who helps me make the grants. So, and then I have some other resources around the teams and stuff, but just that's a constraint. All right. So this is the Hewlett Foundation strategy for open educational resources. I'm not going to get back on open educational resources. If you don't know what open educational resources are, you can look it up on Wikipedia or on the Hewlett Foundation website, or even in the strategy document that I sent around. This will give you a little sense of what we're trying to accomplish, though. So this is the refresh strategy. When I came in, there was like one main goal, and that was to get open educational resources into the mainstream. And that's kind of where it stopped. And there really wasn't a clear, like, here's how we're going to do that. It was just get open educational resources into the mainstream. That was the strategy. It wasn't, no offense to my colleagues, but it wasn't much of a strategy. And it wasn't one that I could take on and actually operate against. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I, together with some consultants that helped with this and other folks at the foundation, my boss was the director of the education program, and there was another program officer who actually was the one who set up the QEDC strategy previously. She was an expert in education and in philanthropy especially. And she and I, together with some consultants, worked through this strategy in conversations with people out there in the field and determined that open educational resources was at a point where people are starting to pay attention to it because they started to see it as a part of the solution to a problem they care about. So for 10, 13 years, 12 years, the Hewlett Foundation had been pushing open educational resources in its own right, with a first grant to David Wiley and MIT and Rice University. Those were the first grants. David was at Utah State at the time, but those were the first kinds of grants. David Wiley, does anybody not know David? Because he's still adjunct here, right? So anyway, long story short, we were basically throwing money at getting open educational resources out there and just building the field. That's what we were doing. And that's a good initial strategy, by the way. Just like plant 1,000 flowers and see what blooms. Well, by the time I got there were flowers that had bloomed and died, and there were flowers that were still kind of growing, and there wasn't a lot of like cohesion. And so, but we were realizing that the context was, wow, there's this opportunity. People are caring about this because it solves a problem they care about, not because they care about OER. So we decided we shouldn't keep funding OER for OER's sake, even though we knew deep down, like the reason was to help students gain greater access to education, or whatever the reasons might be. In higher education, or post-secondary education, we use kind of global terms, well, I guess not, because K-12 would be primary education, but in post-secondary education, there's an opportunity, the problem that people really care about is the high cost of textbooks and the growing student debt. And a little bit they care about, academic freedom and faculty pedagogy, but mostly cost. And OER can help solve that permanently, sustainably. And so we double down and focus on open textbooks, because textbooks are the thing that faculty usually adopt, most mainstream faculty. We're not talking about the 10% of faculty who are the first on things and the leading edge. We're talking about that person that will, has a hard time checking email sometimes and doesn't necessarily jump on every innovation. What's that person going to be interested in? How are they going to get involved in this? That's the kind of question we ask. So we focus on that. We focus on entire degree programs that are based on open educational resources. That means students can get through an entire 2-year degree without ever paying for a textbook, for instance. Those kinds of cool things. In K-12, the opportunity that presented itself, the context was such that the Common Core had rolled out, the Utah Core, higher standards that are in common across the states, and publishers hadn't responded. The market didn't respond. School districts were trying to figure out, how do we find materials that align to the standards that we're required to meet, our students are required to meet. And open educational resources is an opportunity there to help solve that problem. But the kinds of resources that we needed don't exist or didn't exist. And that's the kind of resources that a school district can actually adopt. So that's an issue, and that's one we're focused on right now. And then we continue to build the field. We call these infrastructure investments. We continue to build freeways and runways and electrical lines and the kinds of things you need for OER to exist. So Creative Commons is an organization that our board gave a separate grant of $10 million to last year, because Creative Commons is so important to this field that we basically helped build. We invested $200 million into OER, just OER. And Creative Commons is having an impact more broadly than that. I should have started with this. Our goal, strategy is driven by the goal, is to make sure that underserved students have greater access to education and receive personalized instruction that improves learning. That's the broader goal of the OER strategy. But we don't do much against that goal itself, right? We do more against the goals that we can operationalize. And these kinds of outcomes. Like we focus on this OER outcome to try and achieve this goal. The OER are used widely as primary materials in mainstream education that then enables effective teaching and learning, and that serves these underserved students around the world. So that's and then we leave a little bit for opportunity, because we don't know what's going to come up. So we always reserve a little bit of money every year, because we don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to talk about one of those opportunities, and I'm glad I had the money to act on it. So how do we know that the strategy is any good, that the money we're spending is having any impact, doing anything toward the goal that we care about? That's a good question. The way we do that is we monitor and we evaluate. Those are the two main activities that and I spend a lot of my time on monitoring and evaluation. Measurement is part of this monitoring. I don't get to do things in M+ anymore, but it's still, understanding principles of measurement actually really helped me to do this. So I'll talk about monitoring first, and then a little bit about evaluation. We use a framework. I use a framework for monitoring that's I'm trying to spread around the foundation, because I think it's a good one, to evaluate individual metrics. So if you write down, say, what are all the things that we care about? What are all the possible things we could measure? That's the question, right? That matter, or that could be at all related to this strategy. How do you determine which ones to do? Because you can't do all of them. You can't monitor everything. Like even with what feels like unlimited resources, I don't have unlimited time. There aren't unlimited resources. So there's this 4M framework that I like to use. So number one, is the metric meaningful? If it's not meaningful, if it really doesn't matter, then throw it out. Is it measurable? So it could be meaningful, but there's really no good way to measure it. I try to think of an example of that. I'll think of one. Maybe there was some in the list that we had. And this is a really important one. Even if it's meaningful and measurable, can we actually move it? Like, can we change it? Is it malleable? So some examples of things that are like grit. Grit is a good example. People talk a lot about grit. Something that, matters. It's meaningful. We believe grit is meaningful, for instance. It's hard to measure, and it's unknown how much you can change it. That's what people are trying to figure out. That's an example of something where you're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure, right? Whereas like students' ability to collaborate, for instance, could be meaningful, measurable, malleable. And then this last one is one that I think is important as well. Is it malleable? Just to make it fit the forums. Meaning, even if it's meaningful and measurable and malleable, can we afford to measure it? Like ongoing, because monitoring is something you should do ongoing, not one time, right? So if you can afford to do that, then it's probably highly likely you should pay attention to this metric. that fits all four of those. That's what we decided. So we went out and created a whole list of metrics for each area of our strategy, the post-secondary area, the K-12 area, and then the general field area. And we had a big long list, and there were several of us that looked at each of those metrics and went through and rated them on those 4 M's. And then we brought those ratings together, and we didn't use psychometrics, I'm sorry. But we did, because, you know, a lot of it was about meaningfulness, right? And we made a determination.
Could have been a factor now.
We sure could have. I should show you the spreadsheets. But we also needed to get it done in the time that we had to do it. And this is one of those things where it was more about coming to agreement about what was important to measure and what we actually could do. A lot of things were about what can we actually measure. So in post-sec, I'll just give you the examples. I'll run through them pretty quickly. We are interested in the percentage of faculty who adopt OER as primary course material. Meaningful, measurable, malleable, and moneyable. This is a metric that actually fits all 4 of those really well. It's probably our it's the highest rated on all of those. And we're interested in this across all courses in higher education generally. Now in the US, potentially in the world, and we're interested in the highest enrolled courses, like where most students attend. So physics, bio, the 100 level courses. Because we can get separate metrics for those that are meaningful, that tell us something about getting OER into the hands of all students and having faculty use them. So that's an example of one. These OER degree programs I talked about. So how many are there at how many institutions is something that we can measure on an ongoing basis, annually. We can know this number, and it gives us a sense of where we are, yeah.
In the numbers that are next to those bullets, are those actual measurements that you've made?
Those are current.
Okay.
Yep. Good question. Yeah, so this is as of the latest time that we've measured.
Quick follow-up, are those posted publicly? Are they open?
Yeah, I mean, it's this. Yeah, this is in the report by the Babson Survey Research Group. So that is a good question. So this is new. Like, we've not done a good job of monitoring. And I will say, if you go across the entire, like my colleagues in education, they get kind of mad when I put this up because they're like, we don't have anything to tell the board. You have all these numbers. I'm like, well, it takes some time to put the numbers down. But that's a good point. And I think in the continuing work that I'm going to do is what's Hewlett's role in putting out this information? Because it's out there. Like, we have people collect it for us, or we pull it from somewhere else. It's compiling it into one place against the Hewlett strategy that we've not actually posted. But yes, we should. And right now, actually, the reason we've not done this is because we're actually putting together the targets. So I'm not comfortable putting together targets myself. Like, what do we hope this number is next year, and what do we hope the number is 5 years from now? I made a stab at that and realized that's really dumb. So we're actually, to do that myself, so we're actually sending out surveys to our grantees and others in the field that in different areas to give us a sense of what they think, what do they predict. I mean, it's all going to be subjective anyway, but it's something, an expert opinion about where things might be that we can kind of measure against. We're interested in the content coverage of open educational resources, particularly open textbooks, because that's where we're focused. We had in there the content coverage across the board of anything even beyond open textbooks, but realized that wasn't easily measured, and mostly it's possible to measure it, but it was not affordable to really monitor what every single piece of OER out there, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pieces of content, and what subjects they cover.
I guess that was my question. These are just the titles that your grant funds, or is it all open resource anywhere?
We fund open educational resources generally, and we had before, but now we're kind of doubling down on discrete units of content that are adoptable in a systematic way. So basically, going from idiosyncratic OER adoption to systemic OER adoption. That's sort of the trajectory that was the shift that my strategy made, because most of it was idiosyncratic. There is a metaphor that involves ducks. If we have time, I'll tell it to you. We're also interested in who's working on this. So academic library is working on OER. Current number is 50, including, where'd Holt go?
He's there.
Gave you his chair.
Holt, stand up.
He's always there.
He'll be back.
Oh, he's gone. So including BYU. BYU is now one of the 50 academic libraries in the United States working on OER with someone dedicated to focusing on helping faculty adopt OER. One of the reasons I'm here today is because one of my grantees is here working with the BYU Library, and BYU Hawaii's library is here today, and BYU Idaho's library is here today. And it's such, like, I want to cry, because if there's ever been a situation of a prophet in your own land, it's BYU. Because nobody at BYU would listen to David Wiley when he was here. And it took bringing in another person named David from the University of Minnesota to finally say, hey, you should do this. To David's credit, David in Minnesota had to bring David Wiley there to convince them. And then, I add this is one that we're kind of monitoring. It's hard to get this number broadly, but savings to students by faculty adoption of OER. There's some controversy about this number. This number, 156 million, is just one grantee of ours named OpenStax College. As of this August, they hit $156 million in savings to students because faculty have adopted one of their textbooks. In K-12, I have very little baseline data. We've just started monitoring K-12. K-12 is different from higher ed in a lot of ways. But these are the things we're thinking about caring about. These are the things we are caring about. We're going to monitor these and adjust them when we find out whether they're going to be measurable or not. So the number of districts that formally adopt OER's core curriculum, like math grades 6 through 8. So the issue has been, prior to 2 years ago, there was no such thing. There was no open educational resource that a district could adopt for an entire grade band. The state of New York produced some, and now something like 50,000 districts around the country have adopted it. All right? So that's one we're looking at.
TJ, there's only 16,000 districts.
Oh, is that true? Oh no, it was 50,000 like downloads and things like that. And now it's moving up into the millions of downloads because teachers will download it. Yeah, that was a good catch. Fact check. She worked for CNN. This one's one I'm not sure about. I'm not sure how measurable this will be, but like once a district does adopt, do they keep that same material year over year? Do they go back to something else? Do they? What's the recidivism rate? Is how I would say it in my vernacular. This one's an interesting one that might be challenging, but it's definitely meaningful to us. The amount of money that districts repurpose or reallocate from the savings that they accrue toward other goals, particularly professional development for educators, to work with that open educational resource. This one is one that we can monitor, and we have a baseline for it. The actual number of openly licensed full-year course materials available. So this is by grade. So there are actually 72 of these courses, so like a 6th grade math and a 7th grade ELA. There's some science out there. So there's actually quite a bit of material.
Yeah, are those all found in OER Commons or?
Yeah, you can find them in OER Commons. Engage New York has some. This new organization that we, together with the Gates Foundation and a few others, have set up called Open Up Resources, formerly called the K-12 OER Collaborative, is producing some, that they're not out yet. These come from, a lot of these are actually from the publishers that responded to the Engage New York work. So Learn Zillion and Eureka Math, Great Minds, some of those things. We count those as those courses. And there's about 8 publishers that have published openly licensed full-year course materials. And we're monitoring that. And then this one's like really broad. Like that's a little more narrow. The OER field, all the things that need to be there. But we have some interesting metrics. One, we're interested in policy. A lot of what Hewlett does is try to influence policy and smart policy. And have, it's a policy lever is the one we pull a lot. So we monitor the number of policies and government grant programs related to OER around the world. This is a global number. There's about 131. Some of these are national policies, like Fiji's national OER policy and Poland's national OER policy. And the US has some as well. The Affordable Textbook Act that is going through the Senate sometime, hopefully. Those sorts of things, down to institutional policies. So does BYU have a policy, or does this organization over there have a policy? Those sorts of things we monitor. We could be more nuanced than this one, and probably need to be, but that's where we start. We're going to start monitoring mainstream media. OER is hitting the mainstream media quite a bit. And we're going to start paying attention to the number and nature of those articles. Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they neutral? Are they related to something else and OER is brought in because it's a solution to an important problem? That's what we want to see happening more. Those sorts of things. And then this was one we could do internally only. But remember Hewlett OER grants with multiple funders. I have a personal goal of increasing the number of funders interested in OER. And so this is an important, meaningful, really easy to measure metric how many multi-funder grants do we have? How often are we funded with Gates or with NSF or with the Foundation for the Advancement of Man in France or whatever? Number of researchers, both faculty and graduate, that are studying OER. This is one that's growing rapidly. There are over 150 researchers right now. When I left BYU 3 years ago, there were 3 of us. There were more than that. But it wasn't that many. And this is partly a lot of the work that John Hilton is doing here and Lane Fisher in the Open Education Group. The work that the Global OER Graduate Network is doing in the UK and around the world, and the work that the ROAR 4D research on OER for development in South Africa are bringing more and more people into this this is a field you should be studying. It's an important area to look at. And we're pushing on that. We're funding 2 out of those 3 things. Also then, the output of that research should be something like academic articles and reports. So this number, 873, comes from the OER Knowledge Cloud, but if you do a JSTOR search, it's something like 3,500 that have the terms, in quotes, open educational resources. So it's hard to know what the right number is. This 873, though, seems like the best number so far because it's actually a curated list of research, and it's in multiple languages. This includes Spanish, which is pretty much the only language I know that has OER research in it. And then the number of works with a Creative Commons license is one that gets published every year by Creative Commons, is relevant to us. It's at 1.2 billion right now, or at least as of last fall. So that's a good growing number. It was up from 800 million the year before, so it's starting to go like that.
In terms of funders and researchers, I'm assuming the lion's share are US based, or how much traction are you seeing internationally to those?
So it's actually much more international
More than
US based
Really?
on the research side, yeah. Even trying to get US research. I think, Delana, were you the first US researcher in the Global OER Graduate Network?
For K-12.
I think generally. They could not get anyone from the US to join the Global OER Graduate Network. So yeah, we're trying. So actually the grant to BYU for the Open Education Group was for the OER Research Fellows Program, so that we could get more researchers here in the US working on this. And Dr. Hilton's had an amazing success, so much so that he spent all of his money in 1 year that he was supposed to spend over 2 years. So because he had so many people interested. That's the kind of thing that is really exciting about that. All right, so that's monitoring. I was giving you the metrics. So questions about monitoring?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that you're a strategy management team of 1.5.
1 now.
Okay.
The other half left, she termed out. So Hewlett has term limits. You get 8 years and you're done.
Okay.
That's me.
Do you connect with all 150 researchers on Twitter?
If they maybe on Twitter. I
Yeah.
don't connect with all of them. No, I connect with a set of about 25 grantees.
How do you monitor all this? Like, you must automate something with like Google.
We actually had a grant to Lunametrics to do some Google Analytics for us, like to monitor website stuff of our grantees. It wasn't really valuable. It ended up not being meaningful. It was measurable. It was also not really directly malleable by our work. So that was one thing we did, and it's sort of not so good.
I'm curious what your most effective monitoring methods are.
We have a fellow who is we have a fellowship program, and so it's a 3-year fellowship, and our fellow is generally the one who's been involved in collecting the data. A lot of this is a few emails, or a few searches on the web. A lot of this data actually is, so we have a grant or contract with a survey group that gets a lot of the data around higher education, faculty adoption. So we have certain things that we do actually are specifically designed to get this data, and others our grantees provide to us when we ask for it. So it's not, you're right, it's not very systemic, it's pretty ad hoc, and it's what you get when you have a strategy shop with one. But, well, and I guess I should say, and I do this better than others at the foundation. It's not something that's always top of mind for others. And education in general, we're much more on top of monitoring and evaluation. That's what we hear from the Effective Philanthropy Group. So this is a really good question.
Thanks.
You have some thoughts about that? Automate? Oh, yeah. Hi.
Hi, this is such a high-minded approach, so I hate to take it down a notch, but do you have any real-world ways to incentivize people, like, Teach for America made their program the hot program to get into, even though it was a very generous, program, they made it hard to get into so that they drew a lot of high caliber students to work in it. Or Google, if you get so many hits, you're gonna actually get money because you've got advertisers. So will people be incentivized to contribute their creative work to Creative Commons and get some kind of, is there an incentivized way of helping it to grow of its own energy?
Well, I mean, what I think Creative Commons is a very, very specific question about a single grantee working on this, but it's a good one. So I'll give a quick answer. The CEO of Creative Commons is building their strategy around that. Like they're trying to figure out that question. How do we get people to contribute and participate in the commons? And they're looking at this kind of models that Twitter and Facebook use. Not around advertisement, but around gratitude. There's a huge incentive for if you can interact with people. And Strava. Strava is the best example. I know, does anybody do Strava, ride a bicycle, or run? That's a bad example. Never mind. All right. So, but anyway, people acknowledging what you're doing, giving credit for what you're doing, and incentivizing it. Because the commons is free and open by definition.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be a marketplace there. There's not even going to be and resource scarcity is not going to work.
And
so
even a status, I mean, nobody gets a lot of money for a lot of creative input they do anyway in the academic world, but.
Yeah. Well, Delaney over here, she would tell you that she's a part of the Open Education Consortium, the OEC, because it gives awards. And her school gets awards from them that mean something. So that's an example. That's a good question. Any others? All right, so let's talk about evaluation briefly, because I want to spend, we're going a little longer here than I hoped. But we do evaluations. So monitoring we do ongoing. Evaluations we do when we're interested in a particular question. Right? We're interested in a question about the field generally, or it's something that's really hard to monitor. We can say, well, maybe we can evaluate this. We can hire somebody else to do it, to spend time diving deep into this question. And we generally hire evaluators, like SRI or OS Impact, companies that do this, that have expertise in this field, but also individuals sometimes. We'll hire them to do it as well. And so we've commissioned a few evaluations recently. Let's give you an example of the kinds of questions we tend to evaluate. We wondered about the investments we were making in international policy for OER. It's a big question. But we really only had two main grantees working on this. The Commonwealth of Learning, which is an organization set up by the Commonwealth states, so the former British Empire, to focus on distance education. Fascinating organization, you should look at them. And then the United Nations, UNESCO. Those are our two big grantees. 3 minutes? Is that clock on?
Good chance.
Oh, 12:50.
Oh.
Okay, well, I'll take it. So anyway, so we wanted to know this. We asked a question, what is the progress, impact, and coherence? They determined the methods would be document review and in-depth interviews. They did all the work, and then they determined that, yeah, actually we're having quite a large impact there. We can get into the details of that. But that helped us make a decision. Do we continue funding this? Do we give more money to it? Is this important? And it helped us make a strategic decision. Another one was of that one organization I just mentioned, the Open Education Consortium. I wanted to know a whole range of questions like about this one grantee. And it wasn't necessarily, should I keep funding, but actually more for them. What can they do to improve their efficacy? And I wanted to know the value that they are playing in the field. And so they did a document review, in-depth stakeholders, and even did a survey of, this is a membership organization, so they sent surveys to institutions around the country, around the world. And actually found that this is an organization that is critical to the OER field. If it went away, it would be a really bad thing. So that helped us realize, okay, we need to figure out something. They need to figure out sustainability. We need to give them more money, those sorts of things. All right, so I talked about saying no. I'll take 2 minutes to talk about saying yes, because that's about the percentage of time I get to say yes. But boy, it's exciting when you get to say yes. So one person that I said yes to was somebody who had already been told yes, who had such resounding success that he came to me early and asked for more money because he was having such success. His name's Dave Ernst. He's at the University of Minnesota, and he runs the Open Textbook Network, which works with libraries and CTLs to provide them support to help faculty review and adopt open textbooks. Dave Ernst is literally meeting with department chairs and deans at BYU right now, right this minute, and he'll be meeting with Holt and other library staff at 1:30 to talk about this work. It's super fun to be able to say to Dave, yeah, I'm going to give you another grant even though your first grant hasn't ended, which is pretty rare. But he had so much success, so quick, and so caught on fire so fast. that we were able to say yes, yes, yes. He keeps asking, and I have to say no, but, you know, it was fun. Another one was at the University of Mississippi. This is Bob Cummings, who wanted to establish an OER degree program across Mississippi. That was a big ask. It was really fun to be able to say yes to him. And I could tell you that story, but we don't have time. I want to tell you this last story just quickly. The Wiki Education Foundation is one of these kind of an opportunity. It wasn't really in our core strategy, but it was, oh, this makes a lot of sense. The Wiki Education Foundation works with faculty across the country, across the continent actually, North America, to provide them support to have their students work with Wikipedia, to improve Wikipedia, to edit Wikipedia, to do authentic work that gets seen. And a lot of their work is in science and in medicine, where a lot of people go to Wikipedia for information. The interesting thing about this is I offered them a grant, but it had some strings attached. They had to work with my money just in the Bay Area. It was just the nature of the money that came where I got it. And Tom Porter, who's at the top middle there, is their development officer. And he's amazing. I remember the day he called me and said, no, I don't want your money. That takes us too far away from our strategy. Once he said no to me, I could not wait to give him a grant because I knew that he was serious about his strategy. And so I had to took time to get there, but finally was able just last week to make them a $500,000 grant to continue their work, which is really around how you use open educational resources in the classroom. Really fascinating ways that are having impacts. Students are making contributions to articles that are being seen 22 million times in the first 3 months. Like that's more than your blog is going to be seen. Like these are real authentic things. So it's really fun to say yes, and then obviously times to say yes. And times up we can't even chat. But I'll stick around. I think I'm going to go down for soup for a little bit. So that's it. I talked to you for a long time. That was awful pedagogy. But
Let's give you a few minutes for any pertinent questions if somebody wants to raise.
we kind of answered them as we went along. So.
Fred, what's on your mind?
I'm curious if any of the other philanthropies have kind of followed, apparently, Hewlett's lead in the outcomes-driven philanthropy.
Yeah, it's many. Most of the top 20 foundations have followed Hewlett, and interestingly enough, some of them are now pushing back. They're going back to, well, I can't get into all the details because I don't know a lot of them, but what I'm hearing from Faye and others is that it's actually starting to be, it was sort of really faddish to do this, and now some are going back to you know what, we just want to fund systems. Like, we don't want to be thinking so much about monitoring and evaluation.
Because it's hard? Or time consuming?
Time consuming, or they feel like it's too micromanaging. Like, we don't micromanage. We don't get involved like in the details of grants and the work that happens, but I think sometimes grantees feel like we're maybe too, like we're trying to measure them all the time. That's mostly the aversion to it. People push back to being measured. That was the issue I faced as the director of assessment and accountability. Schools push back to being measured. So that's I think that's some of the things that are happening. And so I see it as a kind of on a decline, not an upswing.
What's the biggest challenge you face in trying to give other people's money away?
That is other people's money. No, that's not the biggest challenge. That is a challenge, though. They call it opium, OPM, and it's addictive and it's hard. And the Hewlett Foundation has term limits. I talked to Walter Hewlett, who's the son of Bill Hewlett, who's been literally on the board for 50 years. He comes off this year. And I asked him about the term limit question. I said, why do you have that? He says, well, as far as I can remember, we just don't want the program officers to forget that it's not their money. It's not their strategy. It's not their work. They're an agent. That's probably the hardest thing, to remember that always, to stay modest and humble. And people want to talk to you because you have money. That's hard. It actually is hard. It's like kind of grating sometimes. It's a good question.
So thank you for taking time to come back to BYU, for sure, and do this. My question is, does Hewlett's definition of OER extend? I mean, we know OER refers to textbooks and content, but does it extend to platforms and tools?
Software.
Software.
So we don't have an explicit definition around that, but we call to the open source software definitions and movement. So, you know, we don't do free and open source software work. Like, we don't fund things directly around that. But some of the infrastructure that we fund can kind of influence that. We've given money to like the Internet Archive, One of our key grantees, her husband runs the Wayback Machine. That's kind of cool. So if you want to learn more about that market, love to talk to people who are interested in the Wayback Machine. We do encourage our grantees to put an open license, an open source software license on their technology, but it's not, we don't like hold the canon of definition for open source software like we do for OER. Hewlett's kind of the place people source as this is the definition of OER. Although our goal was to get UNESCO's definition to be the source, but it wasn't a great definition. It was the first definition, and they haven't changed it. We should work on that.
So we better go downstairs and then you can ask more questions.
Yeah, I'll come down for a bit for soup. Is it breakfast?